2 months before our wedding, my fiancée told me she wanted to explore her feelings for a coworker. So I ended the relationship and let them have each other. Funny thing is, 8 months later she showed up again. The whole situation started when she asked for what was basically a hall pass so she could test drive her coworker before marrying me. Instead, I gave her something better, a permanent break from the relationship. The twist is that the guy had a fiancée too. I'm Nate, a 29-year-old who works in aviation safety certification and flight software compliance, which basically means making sure the systems that keep planes from falling out of the sky meet federal standards. My job has me spending half my time in hangars, airport offices, and small regional terminals across the Midwest, and the other half either driving along I-70 or sitting around in Kansas City International waiting on delayed flights. The job pays well and I'm good at it. I had been engaged to Katia for 14 months, and we'd been together for almost 3 years overall. She originally came from Ukraine for graduate school and ended up staying in the States. I met her at a friend's birthday party at a rooftop bar in the Crossroads district. She was the kind of beautiful that makes you stop in the middle of a sentence. Dark hair, sharp features, dressed like she'd just stepped out of a European fashion magazine. At the time I figured she was completely out of my league, but she seemed genuinely interested in talking. We ended up spending nearly 2 hours chatting about everything from her adjustment to life in America to my strange job that nobody really understands, plus arguing about the best barbecue spots in Kansas City. She had this ability to focus on you completely, like nothing else in the room existed, and I was hooked right away. The first year together was amazing. She brought me into her world of elegant dinner parties with her friends where everyone dressed up and the meals were always homemade and impressive. In return, I introduced her to Chiefs games and little hole-in-the-wall barbecue spots she probably didn't love as much as she pretended. In many ways, we balanced each other out. Looking back, though, I can see that I was probably more accommodating than I should have been. Katia had strong opinions about almost everything. Where we should eat, what we should do on weekends, even how I should dress when we went out. I usually went along with it because it seemed easier and, if I'm honest, I wanted her to be happy. My best friend Cody called me whipped more than once. I told him he was just jealous and he told me I was just blind. Still, I wasn't completely spineless. When she asked me to skip my cousin's wedding so we could attend a coworker's gallery opening instead, I refused. And when she suggested I should look for a job that required less travel because she didn't like being alone, I told her my career wasn't up for negotiation. I did have a backbone, I just didn't use it nearly as often as I should have. I proposed about 14 months ago at her favorite restaurant on the plaza. I'd spent weeks planning it, coordinating with the staff and carrying the ring hidden in my jacket pocket through the entire dinner. The ring itself had belonged to my grandmother, a vintage piece with a center diamond and 2 small sapphires. I had the stones reset into a more modern band because Katia had very particular taste, and my grandmother's original setting definitely wouldn't have met her standards. When I finally got down on one knee, she actually teared up and said yes before I'd even finished asking the question. Within 30 seconds, she had posted the engagement on Instagram. The photo racked up 400 likes in the first hour, and she updated her bio to future misses before we'd even paid the bill. The following month, her parents flew in from Chicago to celebrate. Her mother brought traditional Ukrainian pastries she'd spent 2 days baking, and her father brought a firm handshake and a set of expectations. Victor was a classic old-school Eastern European type who gripped my hand like he was testing my strength. Her mom, Irina, was friendlier but clearly had high standards for whoever married her daughter. Apparently I passed, because Victor later told me privately he was relieved Katia had found someone stable, someone who would take care of her. I took that responsibility seriously, maybe more seriously than I should have. Soon after, we found an apartment together in a nice building near the plaza and split the rent 60-40 since I earned more. We began planning a wedding for early June, and her parents generously offered to help cover some of the costs, which was helpful since the budget kept climbing. Katia had a very specific vision. The venue had to be perfect, the flowers had to match exactly what she wanted, and the guest list kept growing because she couldn't imagine leaving anyone from her social circle out. By the time everything was finalized, we were planning for about 140 guests, a venue in Parkville overlooking the river, a 6-piece band, and a photographer who had previously shot weddings for Kansas City Chiefs players. In the end, the total budget had ballooned to around $62,000. Her parents had agreed to contribute $20,000, and I was covering everything else. Every vendor already had deposits, and save-the-date cards were sitting on refrigerators in homes across 3 different states. I went along with it all without much complaint, writing checks, nodding along while looking at fabric samples, and pretending I cared about the subtle difference between ivory and eggshell. That's what you do when you're planning a future with someone. You compromise. What I didn't realize at the time was that I seemed to be the only one doing it. 2 months before the wedding, everything was fully locked in. The venue was reserved, the caterer confirmed, the photographer booked, and the save-the-dates had already gone out. Her dress was being altered, my suit had been ordered, and we were officially in the final countdown. Then Tuesday happened. I had just returned from a 3-day trip to Wichita where I'd been certifying avionics upgrades for a regional airline. It had been long days inside a stuffy hangar reviewing documentation, running system tests, and dealing with mechanics who treated compliance rules like optional suggestions. I was exhausted, but it was the satisfying kind of tired that comes from doing your job well. When I walked into our apartment, Katia was already sitting at the kitchen table with a look on her face I had never seen before. She looked serious, almost like she had practiced what she was about to say. She told me she needed to talk about something important regarding us and the wedding. I sat down across from her, still in my work clothes, assuming the conversation would be about seating charts or some last-minute vendor issue. Instead, she said she had been doing a lot of thinking lately about commitment and about being completely certain before getting married, and that maybe we should take a break before the wedding. I asked her what kind of break she meant, and that's when she brought up Dmitri, a guy from her office who worked as a project manager and had been collaborating closely with her on a major campaign. She explained that they had developed what she called an emotional connection, and that before she walked down the aisle she felt she should explore those feelings so she could be absolutely sure she was making the right choice. I just sat there trying to process what she was saying. My fiancé, with our wedding only 2 months away, was essentially asking for permission to pursue another man. Someone she worked with and saw every single day while I was often traveling for work. I asked how long this had been going on. She immediately became defensive and insisted nothing physical had happened, that they had only been talking and getting closer. According to her, he understood her in ways that were different and was around when I was constantly away for work. The implication hit exactly where she intended it, as if somehow my job was the reason she had developed feelings for someone else. So I asked her what exactly I was supposed to do during this so-called exploration period. She calmly told me to wait for her and give her the space she needed to sort out her feelings. She said it as casually as if she were asking me to grab milk from the store. She even added that if I truly loved her, I would want her to be completely certain before entering marriage and free of any doubts. It was obvious she had rehearsed the entire conversation and probably even run it by friends who told her it was a reasonable request. But this was where her assumptions about me fell apart. She expected the same reaction I'd given so many times before, where I'd accommodate her, compromise, and put her needs first. Instead, I stood up. I told her there would be no break, no exploration, and no waiting around while she figured out whether another guy was a better option. Either we were getting married or we weren't, and if she felt the need to explore feelings for a coworker, then the answer was simple. We weren't. Her expression changed instantly as the calm, rehearsed composure cracked. She insisted she wasn't asking to break up, only asking for space and time to process things, and asked why I couldn't understand the difference. I told her I understood perfectly. What she wanted was to keep me on standby while she test drove someone else, and that wasn't space, it was treating me like a backup plan. I looked straight at her and told her I don't do backup plans. She started getting emotional then, accusing me of being unreasonable and saying she was actually being honest instead of secretly cheating behind my back, which she claimed most guys would appreciate. I replied that most guys would have walked out 30 seconds into that conversation and that I had simply taken longer to catch on. Then I asked her to give the ring back. That's when her entire demeanor shifted. The tears stopped and her eyes went cold. She asked if I was really serious. I told her I had never been more serious about anything. She argued that the ring was a gift and that I couldn't demand it back just because I was upset. But I told her the engagement was over, which meant the ring came back. That's how it works. We argued for another 10 minutes as she tried everything from guilt to anger to bargaining. But I didn't budge. Eventually she yanked the ring off her finger and threw it at my chest. I caught it cleanly out of the air. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Before she walked out, she stopped and turned back toward me, her eyes burning with anger. She said I would never find someone as beautiful as her, that no one would ever love me the way she had, and that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Then she slammed the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there alone in the apartment holding my grandmother's ring, and strangely enough, I didn't feel heartbroken. What I felt instead was relief, like I'd been waiting for something to go wrong for months and it had finally happened. The first thing I did was text Cody. His reply came back in less than a minute saying it was about time and asking if I wanted hot wings. 45 minutes later, he showed up at my place with a bag from our usual wing spot, a notebook in his hand, and a grin like it was Christmas morning. Cody had never liked Katia. He always said she treated me like an accessory and that she seemed more interested in having a fiancé than actually being with me. I used to defend her, telling him he didn't understand her and that he was being unfair, but looking back it turns out he probably understood her better than I did. He dropped the wings on the table, cracked open an energy drink, pointed at me and told me to walk him through everything from the beginning without leaving out a single detail. I explained the entire conversation while he listened quietly, which was unusual for him. When I finished, he just shook his head and said he was honestly surprised it hadn't happened sooner, adding that a woman who posts her engagement ring online before even calling her mother isn't in love with the person. She's in love with the announcement. Then he pulled out his notebook, uncapped a pen, and said we were going to treat this like a project with deliverables, timelines, and priorities. I asked if he was serious and he said absolutely, explaining that most people handle breakups emotionally and make mistakes, but we were going to handle it strategically so I wouldn't mess anything up. Within 20 minutes he had mapped out everything I needed to deal with, including the apartment lease, the wedding vendors, our shared accounts, joint subscriptions, and even controlling the narrative of what happened. He labeled certain tasks as high impact and low effort, telling me to start with subscriptions. That part hadn't even crossed my mind yet. Over the past 2 years, Katia and I had combined almost everything. Streaming services, grocery delivery, cloud storage, music platforms, fitness apps, meal planning subscriptions, all under accounts in my name and paid with my credit card. She used those services constantly, meaning a huge portion of her digital life was running on systems I was paying for. Cody circled that section of the list 3 different times and called it the petty satisfaction column, saying it wasn't essential for the breakup, but it was great for morale, specifically his morale. I told him I didn't want to be petty, but he insisted it wasn't pettiness. It was practical since there was no reason I should keep paying for services used by someone who had just asked for permission to pursue another man. Then he leaned back and joked that watching her get logged out of everything one by one would be extremely satisfying. He wasn't entirely wrong, but before doing any of that I had something more important to handle. I knew Katia well enough to predict what she would do next. Once she calmed down, she would start calling friends and messaging family members to shape the story, framing the situation as if I had wildly overreacted to something reasonable. By the next morning, I would probably be the villain who ended the relationship over a simple conversation about feelings. I needed to get ahead of that, so I wrote a short message that was direct and factual with no emotion at all. I said that Katia had asked me that night to pause our engagement so she could explore her feelings for a coworker named Dimitri, that I declined and ended the engagement, and that the wedding was canceled. I added that I wanted them to hear it from me directly. I sent the message to her parents, her sister, and 3 of our mutual friends who I knew would inevitably pass the information along. After sending it, I turned off my phone and finished eating my wings. Cody called that move narrative lock, explaining that in breakups the person who establishes the story first often controls how everything unfolds. By sending that message, I had made it nearly impossible for her to twist the story later without contradicting what her own family had already received. By the next morning, the message had already done its job. Her sister had shared a screenshot of it in their family group chat. 2 of the mutual friends had already spread the news throughout their social circles, and one of the people I had texted happened to work at Katia's agency, which meant that by lunchtime most of her office already knew the facts directly from my message rather than rumors she could manipulate. She still tried to spin it by telling people I had overreacted to a simple discussion about pre-wedding nerves. But whenever anyone asked follow-up questions, her version quickly started to fall apart, because the details simply didn't line up. Her story quickly fell apart because the timeline didn't make sense, and everyone had already seen my message that specifically mentioned Dmitry by name. After that, I decided to call Victor her father. I'd always respected him and felt he deserved more than just a text message about something this serious. He answered on the second ring, his voice heavy, clearly having already read what I sent. He asked if what I wrote was true, and I told him every word of it was. There was a long silence where I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line before he finally asked what I needed from him regarding the wedding expenses. I told him I would take care of canceling everything and that we could split whatever deposits turned out to be non-refundable, since he had contributed around $20,000 toward the venue, catering, and other arrangements. I even offered to cover the losses myself since technically I was the one ending the engagement. He immediately shut that idea down with a firm voice, saying his daughter created the mess and he wasn't going to let me pay for her mistakes. He explained that in his family, when someone breaks their word, they are the one who faces the consequences, not the person who was wronged. Then he said something that stayed with me. He told me he had raised Katia to know better than this and that he had always tried to teach her that trust is something you build over time, not something you throw away for a moment of excitement. He admitted he didn't know where he had gone wrong, but said he felt ashamed of what she had done. I told him it wasn't his fault because people ultimately make their own decisions, but he replied that I was being more generous than she deserved. In the background, I could hear her mother, Irina, asking what was going on, clearly upset. Victor told her they would talk about it once he finished the call with me. Before hanging up, his voice softened and he said he had hoped I would become part of their family because he believed I was a good man, and that his daughter had been a fool. Hearing that from an old-school Ukrainian father who didn't seem easy to impress hit me harder than I expected. The next morning, Wednesday, I began the long process of canceling everything. The venue coordinator was sympathetic but firm about the cancellation policy, which meant we would lose roughly $8,000 between the venue deposit and the caterer. Victor insisted on handling that payment himself. The photographer was kind enough to refund most of the deposit because she managed to book another wedding for that same date, saying she was sorry things hadn't worked out, but that in her experience calling it off before the wedding usually spared people much greater pain later. The florist kept $1,500, the DJ kept $500, and the six-piece band turned out to be the most expensive loss after the venue with $3,000 that was completely non-refundable. I also had to call the rental company for the tables and chairs, the bakery that was supposed to make the cake, the calligrapher who had designed the invitations, and the hotel where we had reserved blocks of rooms for out-of-town guests. By noon, I had made 14 separate calls and watched about $13,000 vanish for a wedding that would never happen. Later that afternoon, I deleted the wedding website entirely since it had been created under my email account, which meant the registry disappeared with it. All the carefully chosen kitchen appliances, home items, and fancy linens we had selected were gone along with the site, erasing the public proof that our wedding had ever been scheduled. Cody had actually suggested doing that because he believed someone like Katia cared more about the public image than the private reality. In his words, her identity was tied closely to how things looked to others, so removing the public optics would hit harder than anything else. As it turned out, he was right. Around for that afternoon, my phone started blowing up with calls, texts, and voicemails from her. She had apparently tried to show a friend our registry only to discover it no longer existed, then checked the wedding website and found that gone too, and eventually contacted the venue where she learned that her own father had already canceled everything. Her messages went from confused to frantic, then quickly turned angry and eventually threatening. She accused me of trying to humiliate her, said I had gone behind her back to involve her family, and called me vindictive and cruel. I didn't reply to any of it. That evening, I logged into every shared account we had, starting with the streaming services. I changed the passwords, removed her profile, then moved on to the next platform and repeated the process with cloud storage, grocery delivery, music subscriptions, fitness apps, meal planning services, and even the language learning app she had downloaded and used maybe twice. Cody sat across from me the entire time, eating snacks and grinning like he was watching a live event. At one point, he joked that this was better entertainment than anything we could have streamed. I knew it was a little petty, But he had a point. There was no reason I should continue paying for services used by someone who had just tried to put me on hold while she explored another relationship. The messages that followed were something else entirely. Apparently she had been in the middle of watching a show when every device suddenly logged her out. And when she later tried to order groceries, the payment failed because her access was gone. After that, she tried to access the playlist she had spent months curating, only to realize it was gone too. And when she attempted to open the cloud storage where she kept design files for work, she was met with a password error. Her messages moved through several phases, starting with confusion, then realization, and eventually full-blown anger. She even left me a few furious voicemails where her accent slipped out more than usual as she yelled about how I had canceled everything while she was in the middle of watching a show and called me petty and childish, saying she couldn't believe she had wasted 3 years on me and insisting this didn't hurt her at all while throwing in a few insults for good measure. Cody nearly choked laughing when he heard them and said she sounded like she was having an existential crisis. Apparently she tried signing up for her own versions of the services, but some of the premium features I had been paying for weren't included in the basic plans, which led to another round of messages demanding to know if I seriously expected her to start paying full price for things she had been using for free for 2 years. I ignored every single message. Cody said the silence was the most powerful part because nothing would frustrate her more than getting no reaction at all. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The bigger issue was the apartment. We were both on the lease through October, and breaking it early would mean penalties, but I had no interest in months of tense cohabitation while she sorted out her life, especially since she had already started trying to make things difficult. After the subscription shut down, she apparently decided to retaliate by calling my company's HR department and claiming I had been harassing her, saying she felt unsafe and demanding they take action. The problem for her was that there was nothing for them to act on because I hadn't contacted her directly since the lease discussion. Every message she sent had gone unanswered, and the one text I sent to her family had simply stated the facts without threats or insults. HR contacted me. I forwarded screenshots showing she was the one sending aggressive messages, and the whole thing was closed in about 20 minutes. After that, she tried contacting the apartment management to have me removed from the lease, claiming I had created a hostile living situation. Except I wasn't even staying there anymore since I had temporarily moved in with Cody while figuring things out. The building manager had clearly dealt with enough breakups to last a lifetime and had no interest in getting dragged into our drama beyond handling the paperwork. She also attempted to get ahead of me with the wedding vendors by calling the venue and pretending she was managing the cancellation herself while trying to redirect deposit refunds into her account. But the coordinator called me to confirm first, and once I explained the situation, they flagged her number in their system. The caterer received a similar call from her and handled it the same way. None of her attempts to get back at me worked because there was nothing for her to fight against. I wasn't arguing, attacking, or even responding, and she clearly had no idea how to deal with that. On Thursday morning, I went to the leasing office and explained the situation. The manager was sympathetic and said if one of us wanted to keep the apartment alone, that could work, or if we both wanted out early, there would be a 2-month penalty. I asked what my specific options were, and she explained that if I could find a replacement tenant and Katia agreed to sign the release paperwork, I could be off the lease within 30 days. I made a few calls and found out a guy from my company had been looking for a place closer to downtown. I told him about the apartment, sent photos, and quoted the rent, and by that afternoon he said he wanted it and could move in by the 15th if everything checked out. The only thing left was getting Katia to cooperate. I sent her a short text laying out a simple proposal. I would move out, she could stay in the apartment through the end of the lease, and I would cover my share of the penalty for leaving early so we could both move on without drama. Instead of texting back, she called me. Her voice sounded different this time, calmer and less aggressive. She said she didn't want me to move out and that she wanted us to really talk about everything. After a pause, she admitted she had been hasty, said Dimitri wasn't what she had thought, and claimed she had made a mistake in how she brought the situation up. I told her that didn't change anything and that the lease options were still the same. Either she agreed to the arrangement or we would both be stuck in an awkward living situation until October. She went quiet for a moment and then asked where I planned to go. I told her Austin because my company had an open position there for months as regional manager for the Southwest Territory, which meant more money, better weather, and a clean start. I had already spoken with my boss and the job was mine if I wanted it. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone, and I could tell she hadn't expected that at all, probably assuming I would just stay in town. Learning that I was planning to leave the state entirely clearly wasn't something she had anticipated. But the next day she agreed to sign the lease paperwork anyway. On Friday morning we met at the leasing office, and she looked like she had been crying, though some of it felt a little performative. We sat across from each other signing the documents without really making eye contact. Before leaving, she made one last attempt to change my mind, asking if we could slow things down and suggesting that maybe I was making the situation bigger than it needed to be. She looked at me with the same expression that had worked on me so many times before and insisted she had never actually done anything with Dmitri, saying it had only been feelings and that those feelings were something she could work through. I held her gaze and told her that the fact she could even ask for what she had asked told me everything I needed to know, because someone who truly wants to marry me wouldn't feel the need to explore other options first. That simply isn't how it works. She opened her mouth like she was about to argue but then stopped, probably realizing there was nothing left to say. She walked out without another word. The next morning Cody arrived with his truck, and we spent about 8 hours packing up everything I planned to take. Since the apartment had been mostly furnished when we moved in, there wasn't much to divide. I took my clothes, my gaming setup, personal belongings, and a few kitchen items I had bought myself while leaving the rest behind. By Saturday evening my side of the apartment was completely empty. I left the keys on the counter along with a short note that simply said, "Good luck." Cody thought that was far too polite and joked that I should have left a printed screenshot of her asking for the break. But by then I was done. I didn't need to win the last word. I just needed to move forward. Early Sunday morning I got on I-35 and started the long drive south toward Austin. 12 hours of open highway and aviation history podcasts keeping me company. I passed through Oklahoma City around lunchtime and stopped for gas near Dallas around dinner, noticing Texas license plates becoming more common the farther I went. A little after 9 that night, I crossed into Austin city limits and saw the skyline glowing against the dark sky. It felt like the beginning of a completely new chapter, with a new city, new job, and new life ahead of me, and I never once looked back. The first few weeks in Austin were hectic as I handled all the practical details of settling in, finding an apartment, setting up utilities, and getting familiar with the new office. My territory now covered Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and parts of Colorado, which meant dealing with plenty of regional carriers, small airports, and lots of flights. The office itself felt very different from the one I had left behind because it was more relaxed and collaborative, without the same corporate politics. My boss, a former Air Force officer named Paul, cared far more about results than appearances. He didn't worry about how many hours I sat at my desk or how many meetings I attended. What mattered to him was whether operators passed their certifications and whether clients were satisfied. During my first month, I spent far more time traveling than sitting in the office, flying to places like El Paso for documentation reviews, heading to Phoenix for software certification testing, and even driving out to small airports in the hill country where charter companies needed help fixing compliance issues after previous specialists had made mistakes that left them facing potential fines. Each successful certification felt like a small victory, and every new client made me feel more certain that leaving had been the right decision. The work itself hadn't changed, but my mindset had. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I actually felt invested in what I was doing. Staying busy helped more than anything else. Meanwhile, Cody kept me updated on everything happening back in Kansas City. He still had mutual friends in the loop, and they were more than willing to share the latest developments, which apparently turned into quite a mess. Katia tried to spin the story for about 2 days before giving up because my message to her family had already locked in the truth. Her own father was openly telling people that she had asked for a break to pursue a coworker, and her sister couldn't believe she had thrown away what she had. The story spread quickly, and it definitely wasn't flattering. From what Cody heard, Katia doubled down on Dmitri after I left, probably figuring that if she had already lost me because of him, she might as well see where it went. They officially started dating about 2 weeks after I moved to Austin. Cody began sending me updates like he was reporting sports scores, saying that during the first week they were practically inseparable and had lunch together every day at the office. By week 3, she was posting photos of the two of them with captions about finally finding her person, and by week 5 she was introducing him to friends as her boyfriend. Everything was moving quickly, which made sense since she probably needed to convince herself the whole thing had been worth it. Then week 8 rolled around. Dmitry, it turned out, had a fiancée. Not an ex-fiancée, but a current one, a woman in Chicago he had been engaged to for more than a year, which meant Katya had essentially been the side piece the entire time. That emotional connection she thought was so meaningful, the late nights at the office, the feeling that he understood her in a way I supposedly didn't, all of it was just entertainment for a guy who was bored with his real relationship and saw an easy opportunity. She discovered the truth when his fiancée found her Instagram. Apparently one of Katya's photos had location data that didn't match the work trip Dmitry had told his fiancée he was on. So the woman started digging, found Katya's profile, and quickly connected the dots to a relationship her future husband had been hiding. The confrontation played out publicly. The fiancé started leaving comments under Katya's photos calling her out, messaging mutual friends to explain what was happening, and posting screenshots everywhere. She had proof too, text messages between Dmitry and Katya, a restaurant reservation he'd made under a fake name, and hotel charges listed on his credit card statement. She posted everything, and within hours everyone in Katya's social circle learned that she had left her fiancé for a man who had been playing her the entire time. To make things even worse, Dmitry didn't defend her at all. When his fiancée confronted him, he immediately threw Katya under the bus, claiming she had aggressively pursued him and that he had only been polite and didn't know how to shut it down. He even suggested she had misunderstood basic professional friendliness as romantic interest, essentially making her look desperate and delusional. His fiancée didn't fully believe that explanation, but she clearly wanted to, because they started going to couples counseling and within a month they were posting photos together again like nothing had happened. Dmitry kept his relationship, his reputation, and the comfortable life he already had, while Katya was left with public humiliation and the harsh realization that she had been nothing more than someone's side entertainment. Cody called me the night everything blew up and was laughing so hard he could barely talk, saying he had never seen karma move that quickly. I didn't exactly feel happy about it, but I did feel a sense of satisfaction because it confirmed that the choice I made had been the right one. After that, Katya disappeared from social media completely. No more posts, no more stories, no more perfectly filtered pictures of her polished life. The image she had spent years crafting was destroyed overnight and everyone knew it. About 3 weeks later, her agency let her go. Officially, it was part of a company restructuring, but according to one of her coworkers who told Cody, clients had begun requesting different designers because they didn't want their brand associated with someone whose personal drama had just exploded across Instagram. In the creative industry, reputation matters a lot, and hers had taken a serious hit. Meanwhile, things on my side of life were going extremely well. I hit my sales targets for the first quarter, received positive feedback from several clients about my certification work, and gradually built a routine in Austin. I found a great apartment near downtown with a view of Lady Bird Lake, started going to the gym in the mornings, focused on work during the day, and spent weekends exploring the city. I began hiking the nearby trails and joined a recreational volleyball league through work, which helped me meet people including a few coworkers who had also moved to Austin from other places. For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually living my own life instead of constantly adjusting everything around someone else's preferences. It felt good to simply focus on my own routine and interests. 6 months after moving to Austin, I was doing better than I had in a long time, feeling more settled, confident, and like myself again. The job had turned out even better than expected. My territory was expanding, my numbers were strong, and my boss was already talking about the possibility of promoting me to a director-level position within the next year. Around month 4, I had started dating casually again. Nothing serious at first, just easing back into meeting people. Then I met Rebecca. She worked as a sales engineer for another aviation company, and we ran into each other at a conference in Dallas. We ended up seated at the same dinner table with a group and spent most of the evening talking to each other while barely paying attention to anyone else. She was sharp, straightforward, and had this dry sense of humor that kept catching me off guard in the best way. Our first real date was at a taco place she insisted served the best al pastor in Texas, and she was absolutely right. We ended up talking for 3 hours straight, and the whole evening felt effortless in a way my relationship with Katya never had. She knew the basic version of my story, though I kept it short, and instead of pushing for details, she simply said it sounded like I had handled things the right way before casually changing the subject. With Rebecca, everything just felt natural. I could simply be myself, and she genuinely liked me for who I was. If I came home exhausted and just wanted to order pizza and watch something mindless, she was perfectly happy with that. If I suggested spending a Saturday hiking instead of going to some trendy brunch spot, she'd already be grabbing her boots. When Cody came down to visit Austin and met her for the first time, he gave his approval almost immediately. According to him, she was the first girlfriend I'd had who actually seemed interested in me rather than in the idea of having a boyfriend. Meanwhile, bits and pieces about Kadia's life still reached me through friends back in Kansas. After staying with her parents in Chicago for a while, she eventually moved back to Kansas City. From what I heard, her design career had stalled because the whole situation with Dimitri had played out in front of much of her professional network. Victor and I had stayed loosely in touch as well. Every now and then he'd send a message about a Chiefs game or ask how my job was going. He never mentioned his daughter directly, but the unspoken context was always there. About 8 months after the breakup, something unexpected happened. My company sent me back to Kansas for a week to handle a major client meeting and regulatory review that required my specific expertise. I was scheduled to be there for 5 days. I wasn't concerned about running into Kadia since I knew she had moved back to Kansas City from Chicago, and it's a big city where the chances of randomly crossing paths are pretty slim. The work itself went smoothly, for days filled with meetings, inspections, and documentation reviews. By Thursday evening, everything was finished, leaving me with one free night before my flight home the following afternoon. Cody insisted we meet up and suggested trying a new restaurant in the Crossroads district that had opened after I moved away and supposedly had great food. I agreed and met him there, finding the place packed. He had already secured a table near the back and ordered an appetizer by the time I arrived. For the first hour, we just caught up on life, talking about work, Rebecca, his latest dating disasters, and other normal things. Then I noticed her. Kadia was sitting across the restaurant with 2 women I didn't recognize. She was dressed up with full makeup and clearly putting effort into her appearance. But something about it felt different. The confidence she used to carry so naturally seemed forced now, like she was trying too hard, laughing a little louder than necessary while occasionally scanning the room to see who might be watching. I observed for about half a minute and noticed she had lost weight, and the outfit she was wearing looked cheaper than the stylish things she used to wear, which made me wonder how her freelance work had been going since losing her agency job. She hadn't noticed me yet. For a moment I considered just leaving, but Cody had already followed my glance and realized what I was looking at. As soon as he spotted her, his face broke into a huge grin. Leaning closer, he told me not to even think about leaving because this was perfect and the universe had basically handed me a gift wrapped in a bow that I should accept gracefully. I told him I wasn't interested in any kind of drama. Cody said it wasn't about causing drama. It was about her seeing me happy and clearly moved on, because that would say more than any argument ever could. So I stayed, kept talking with him, and kept eating like nothing was wrong. About 20 minutes later, Kadia finally noticed me. For a split second, the fake cheerful expression on her face slipped before she quickly forced it back. She used her phone camera to touch up her lipstick and then walked over to our table. Cody leaned back in his chair and quietly told me not to give her anything. She stopped beside the table and said she didn't realize I was back in town. I told her I was just there for work and leaving the next day. I didn't stand up or offer her a seat, so she remained standing there for a moment like she expected more. When nothing came, she continued by asking how I was doing, if Austin was treating me well, and then asked if I was seeing anyone. I told her Austin was great, the job was going really well, and yes, I was seeing someone and it was going great. The look on her face at that moment was unforgettable. The exact moment she realized the backup option she once assumed would always be there was gone. She asked if I was actually happy. I told her I was. She said she had been thinking about everything and now understood that what she asked for back then had been wrong and that she wished she could take it back. I nodded and told her I appreciated her saying that. She paused, clearly expecting a bigger response, but all I added was that I hoped she found what she was looking for. Then I turned back to Cody and picked up my fork. She stood there awkwardly for a few seconds, unsure what to do, before eventually walking away without another word. Cody waited until she was back at her table before leaning over and asking if I saw her face. I shrugged and said it was whatever. He raised his glass with a grin and said it was a toast to finally standing up for myself at exactly the right time, joking that he would be telling that story at every barbecue for the rest of his life. I told him to go ahead. We finished dinner, and the next day I flew back to Austin where Rebecca picked me up at the airport, gave me a hug, asked about my trip, and then we headed to our usual dinner spot. Honestly, life has never felt better. Guys, we're getting really close to reaching 1,000 subscribers on the channel, so if you're not already subscribed, please consider doing it because it really helps us reach that milestone.